Well, boy, do I have a story for you guys today. Guys, in this video, I want to talk about my first ever in-person debate with a Bitcoin maxi, how it went. Guys, this was no ordinary Bitcoin maxi. This person was part of an extremely notable firm. And in this video, I want to share with you exactly what happened because, guys, I came out of this more bullish than ever on XRP. Like always, if you enjoy these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate that so much. And let's jump into it. Because I'm actually at a crypto conference in Dallas right now. There's a whole bunch of notable speakers. And one of the people that I had the opportunity to talk to at the end of the show was actually one of the research analysts at ARK Invest crypto team. ARK Invest is the firm that specifically Cathie Wood is attached to. Now, one of the things I've always wondered was why Cathie Wood didn't do anything with XRP. She talks about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana. I was always so curious, Cathie, where is XRP? Now, I kind of knew through some of my research into ARK Invest that they had a lot of Bitcoin maximalists at the firm. But here I am at this crypto conference in Dallas, and there it is, one of the actual analysts for Cathie Wood's ARK Invest crypto sort of venture, and I had the opportunity to talk to him. Now, the conversation started off real quick with him actually asking me what I did. And I was telling him a bit about XRP and all the things we do. And he came back to me and he's like, you know, XRP is one of the only cryptocurrencies that we actually have a letter from the firm that states we're not allowed to invest into it. And right there, my eyes just totally lit up. I was like, this is going to be a fun conversation. So I asked him. I said, why do you guys have a letter that doesn't allow you to invest into XRP? I started off and I said, it's weird to me because XRP is one of the few cryptocurrencies that has never fallen outside the top 10, only XRP and Bitcoin. And very quickly, he was like, a little frazzled. He's like, oh, well, you know, it's because they hold so much of the supply. He's like, at any given moment, they could dump all their XRP onto the market and send the price of XRP plummeting. So I was like, okay, so your issue is with the supply concentration. And he's like, yes. So I was like, all right, well, do you know that the XRP supply is actually cryptographically locked and it can't all be released at once? And he said, oh, well, I don't know about that. And I was like, no, it's true. And I said, and the other thing is Ripple's a very large holder of XRP. Why would they want to crash the price? Not only did they cryptographically lock it in a way where they can't crash the price all at once, but even if they wanted to release all at once, what would be their incentive to do so? They've made so much more money over time selling XRP slowly and gradually because the price has slowly gone up. And he very quickly said, well, even outside of that, there's still issues with concentration of supply, even if it's just a perspective. And I said, okay, that's fair, right? That's totally fine if your opinion is like, oh, well, you know, I just don't like the fact that it's structured that way. What am I going to argue with that? No, of course not. But I said, don't you think it's kind of silly that XRP actually has a limited total supply, right? 100 billion. And other chains that you guys cover, like Ethereum and Solana, have an infinitely large supply. And there's always going to be more Ethereum and Solana sold into the market. At least XRP, right? Even though Ripple has a lot yet to be distributed, probably about 39 billion of the 100 billion, Ethereum and Solana, they could just keep on creating new tokens out of thin air and keep selling into the market, and it could be infinite. Who cares where the supply is coming from? I would rather have a set supply coming onto the market than infinite supply coming onto the market. And he goes, well, in the future, I don't know if those will continue to be inflationary chains. And I was like, you're investing now, man. What do you mean you don't know in the future if they'll continue to be inflationary? They're inflationary now. There's no set cap. There will never be a set cap. I prefer something with a set cap. So right then and there, I think he was like, okay, let me get out of this discussion because this one's not going for me well. And he switched over to sort of the Bitcoin discussion. And he said, well, honestly, he's like, me personally, I'm more bullish on Bitcoin than anything else. So I was like, okay, well, fair, right? If you don't want to compare XRP to Solana to Ethereum because you don't feel like that's a fair debate, let's talk about Bitcoin, right? What do you like? What's your thesis on Bitcoin? So I asked him. He said, well, Bitcoin is going to be the new currency. And I paused. I was like, what do you mean Bitcoin's going to be the new currency? I was like, you're telling me that I'm going to be going to the store every day, checking the price of Bitcoin, praying that by the time I get to the store, I still have enough money in my wallet to pay for things in Bitcoin. He was like, yes. He's like, I think that Bitcoin is going to be the new currency of the world. And I was like, so right now, if every single person, right, your max thesis played out, let's say in the next 6 weeks, right? The next 6 weeks, every single person in the world is all using Bitcoin to transact. I was like, you do realize that because of Bitcoin's throughput, every single one of us would only get one transaction every 30 years. And he goes, oh, well, I don't know about all that. And I was like, no, it's true. And he's like, oh, well, they'll figure out engineering upgrades by then. And I was like, how do you have this thesis built out in your head where you don't even understand the core mechanics of any of these things? Is your idea just this utopian view that everyone is using Bitcoin to transact? Or is it that, like, you just are going to ignore all the feasibilities today and just say, we'll figure all those things out and then teleport to the future? Which seemed to be where he was coming from. But I kept on pressing down the road. I said, well, don't you think it's a lot more likely that people are just going to keep using fiat currency? I was like, right now, merchants aren't accepting Bitcoin, really, because they don't have the same protections in place. Right now, the vast majority of people don't want to use wallets. The vast majority of people would rather use fiat, and they might save in Bitcoin, right? I don't see any problem with saving in Bitcoin, but why would people spend it as a transactional vehicle? I said one of the big things that is in the way is you get taxed on short-term and long-term capital gains. It's not even being structured in the United States as something that could feasibly be currency. And he said, well, he's like, the tax situation isn't a big deal. And I said, well, why not? If I go and pay with something and I'm charged a tax upon purchasing it with Bitcoin, then I'm going to increase my actual payment on that good by at least 20% because of long-term capital gains and possibly more because of short-term capital gains. It's like, I'd rather just use fiat currency. And he was like, well, that's not the case if you just pay your taxes in Bitcoin. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin all you want. You're still getting upcharged on every single transaction. He didn't have an argument for that. For him, he was like, oh, well, that's not a big deal, or governments would change it. And I was like, why would governments who use fiat money to create value for the long-term society, why would governments whose absolute monopoly and control on society being fiat currency, why would they disintermediate themselves? Brad Garlinghouse once said, they'll roll out the tanks before they get rid of fiat currency. And I asked him, I said, what's your thesis on that? And he said, it doesn't matter what my thesis is because it's just going to happen. He said, Bitcoin is the best currency out there, and therefore it will win over the long run. And I was just sitting there scratching my head. And I said, well, what makes you think Bitcoin is even going to be seen as a currency? I said, most of the narratives today around Bitcoin that I listen to are all as a store of value. And he's like, that's why it's a better currency. And I was like, well, gold's a better store of value than Bitcoin. And gold's not a currency right now. No one uses gold as a currency. And right then and there, I slowly started to realize something. There wasn't any thought from this guy on how cryptocurrencies work, what the future was going to look like, where the world is headed. He just held Bitcoin and was absolutely convinced that that was the only thing you should hold. It was the only thing that was going to work, and everything else was essentially pointless. But the problem is, and this is the problem I always have with Bitcoiners, is their view of the future seems totally unrealistic. Like, I just don't see a world where people are going to be spending with a volatile currency. I don't see a world where the United States government is going to get rid of control of fiat currency. I don't see a world where we have all these tokenized assets, but they're all just pointless because everyone's using Bitcoin and Bitcoin doesn't have any tokenization capabilities. Like, it's so weird to me that these people are so stuck in this idea that Bitcoin is going to achieve all these things that there's virtually no movement or momentum in society today for. This is an argument where if someone made this argument to me in 2015, I would say, yeah, maybe, man. We're extremely early to this thing. Maybe that could take place. But there's been absolutely no appetite for any of this to happen. And now with the proliferation of stable coins, it's like a negative chance it's going to happen, that Bitcoin is going to become this new currency and replace all forms of fiat. In fact, the exact opposite is happening at a much quicker rate. So at the end of it, we're now going back and forth for quite a bit on a lot of these points. And you could tell he was starting at the beginning. I think he thought he was going to dominate the conversation. Towards the end, he's really getting pretty flustered with some of the things he's saying. It was funny, at this point, we've kind of drawn a little bit of a crowd. And he's getting pretty animated, that I could tell. I kind of had to go easy on him. But he started like kind of throwing up his hands, and he's like, well, I really enjoyed the discussion, but I have to go. And I was like, nowhere for him to go. I mean, we're at a fucking cryptocurrency conference, and there's nothing else going on. But I was like, all right, man. I was like, well, let's continue this tomorrow. Like, I'd love to talk with you some more. And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And we shook hands. But long story short, I mean, if this is the person doing research for ARK Invest, this is the smartest people in the room in comparison to cryptocurrency and the odds of TradFi, guys, we have a long ways to go. But I just walked out of it like laughing to myself. And I was like, I've never been more bullish on XRP. I mean, this guy couldn't put together a single cohesive counter argument for why I shouldn't own XRP and I should own more Bitcoin. And in fact, most of his arguments for Bitcoin just seemed completely unrealistic and just sort of felt like I was talking to someone who didn't have a real good grasp on what the future was going to look like. Felt like I was talking to someone who had no idea of like how this technology was being rolled out, its structural limitations, its advantages, and where it was going to be positioned in the future. And for me, if that's the research going out to the market, if that's the research people are trusting, all right, but I'm going to be taking the other side of it 9 times out of 10. And it makes me more convinced than ever that XRP is at an amazing discount relative to where it's going to be going over the long run and relative to where people actually understand this technology going. Anyway, guys, that's the story. Super, super interesting. I'll make sure to provide any updates if I end up talking to him again. Everyone else was extremely receptive to XRP. Everyone else was extremely interested. Looked at XRP as one of the few things with utility they've looked at. But a lot of the people in the room weren't actually crypto people. This was one of the only few crypto people there. Thought it was a really interesting discussion. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Hope you guys have a great day. For now, Mikkel out.